Hello and welcome back. I'll be attempting a glass ink pen and glass Inkwell here on the Jasa channel. I'll be starting out with a 7mm borosilicate rod. I'll hold it level while I rotate, and this will begin to gather up a small sphere. If I hold it more towards the ceiling, it'll fall back more into a disc. But if I hold it towards the floor, it'll fall straight down more into an oval shape, like an egg. But if I stop rotating altogether, it may drip straight off the rod and onto the floor. So it takes a little bit of hand-eye coordination and some good rhythm to have good timing. And now I'll start sculpting lines into the glass with a simple tool, the butter knife. I'm heating up each area at a time as I'm pushing in each line or groove. I'm going to do about 6 or 8 of them and then start twisting it up. I'll attach a hot punty here to the end and start to heat up the entire section. I need to be careful not to melt out the lines, but get a good core heat and begin to twist it up. And so this is one of the common features I've noticed among mostly all the glass pens I've seen. And so that leads me to believe it may be less of an aesthetic choice and more about functionality for the pen. The grooves in the pen might actually help draw the ink down towards the tip. When it comes to liquids, especially water, it has a natural attraction to narrow cracks and crevices. And so when you have a very small space or tube, you get a higher volume of solid surface against a lower volume of liquid. And so the liquid will have a very strong attractive force and pull itself through the tube. They tend to call this the capillary action. And so I'll go ahead and make another pen. I'm sticking to a very simple and straightforward design. I attached a section of white glass to the front to create the tip. And now I'm going to melt it back again into a sphere and then start the grooving process. I thought the white glass would be a good contrast against the black ink. But then the rest of the pen will be simple, clear glass. I want to focus more on functionality in this video. And now I'm going to heat it up and point it more down towards the floor. This will pull out that sphere and give me a longer tip. And so you'll see how quickly I begin to cut into the glass after removing it from the flame. This is borosilicate glass. It takes a little more heat to melt than your ordinary soda lime glass. Since soda lime glass melts at a couple hundred degrees lower, you can spend extra time working on it outside of your heating element. But it's not as stable as boro, so it's more prone to crack. And so boro can give you a pretty good introduction into glass. And so I'm heating it up as hot as I can without melting out the lines. Then I'll give it a slight twist to get that spiral pattern. And this is one of my more favorite techniques. It can be difficult to draw curved lines, so instead you draw straight lines and then curve your project. I'll pull out the tip to sharpen it up a little bit, and then use my tile snips to cut the back. And there we go. It looks a bit simple but sleek, and hopefully very effective. We'll have to find out later. And so this next one, I decided to get a little more creative. I started out with some OJ from Glass Alchemy. It's an orange cadmium-based color. After I gathered it up and started laying some grooves down, it sort of looked like a pumpkin. And being that we're in October, it's a good seasonal idea. And so I'll lay down about 6 or 8 grooves and then grab some green jade from North Star. I'm going to heat up both ends very molten and connect them in the flame. I'll separate a small section and begin to sculpt that as well. This will be the green vine on top of the pumpkin, and also the tip for the pen. And then I'll leave the lines on the pumpkin straight, but heat up the vine and begin to twist that. And now I think it's looking pretty neat. I'll have to dip it in ink at the end of the video and see how it works. And now we'll be moving over to the Inkwell portion of the video. I'll start off by removing the end of this 12mm heavy wall tubing and then blow out a large ultra thin sphere. These are usually so thin they'll rip right open in the flame. It can be a quicker but sometimes messier way to open a tubing. You may produce what's called bubble trash, which is airborne glass debris. You have to be careful not to breathe it in. My ventilation system is powerful enough to pull it away from me. And so I flared open the first blow tube and opened up this 26mm tubing. You might have noticed how quickly that bubble trash melts back into the tubing. That's the best way to get rid of it, is to melt it back into your piece. The glass reacts more quickly when it's blown out so thinly. Not only does it melt faster, but it may be a bit flexible and, as I said before, airborne. And so I'm heating up the end of this large tubing and I'll begin to flare it open for a blow tube attachment. I want to heat up the ends of the tubing very hot and molten and then attach them in the flame. I'm going to hold it in the flame just a couple extra seconds to make sure I have a really solid connection. I'll have a little extra glass between the two areas, so I'll begin to pull that out just a little bit to form the neck of the connection, which has a small taper to it from the larger tube to the smaller tubing. It kind of acts as a little funnel. Also, flaring these tubes open for a connection is not only to match the other tubing, but it helps keep that lip from melting down and closing up the tube. And so this tube is a little too large for my Inkwell. So what I'm doing here is I'm attaching 2 blow tubes, and then I'll melt the large tube in half and have 2 smaller sections ready to go. And even though I only want 1 section, this is a good manufacturing step to practice. Breaking down your tubing and preparing your projects ahead of time. I'm going to hold my tube in the center of my flame. I want the edges of the flame to wrap around the tubing and reconnect in the back. This will start to melt through the heavy wall tubing in no time at all. And now if I were to use an even larger flame, it wouldn't necessarily quicken up the process. The overall temperature of the flame would remain the same. And since I already have it fully encased in fire, it shouldn't make much of a difference. And now if I were to change the fuel itself and use hydrogen instead of propane, it would burn a little bit hotter and melt a little quicker. But on the other hand, I could use natural gas, which would burn a little cooler. That would be better suited for soft glass working. And now with both ends still hot from the separation, I'm going to puff into both of them to make round bottom tubes. And now I'm going to focus on one of them and start really heating up the end. This will start to contract the tubing down and increase the wall thickness. I want to make the walls extra thick, not only to keep the ink from knocking over and spilling, but also to give it a slight aesthetic appeal. The thicker walls will capture and bend a little bit more light around the vessel. And so it might make it look a little more illuminated, a little more shiny. I'm going to give it a couple slight puffs to make it a bit larger to hold more ink. And then you can flatten the bottom with a graphite paddle. But then a different technique that I like to do instead of marvering is to heat up the very center of the bottom. Instead of giving it a puff, I'm going to suck a little bit of air out. And what this will do is concave or indent the bottom of the vessel inward. And now instead of being completely flat on the bottom, it'll have a circular rim on the outside of the vessel. And a rim will sit pretty stable on a table, even if it's not perfect. And so I'll go ahead and attach my claw grabbers and begin to melt the top blow tube off to finish up the piece. I've gotten a lot of use out of these claw grabbers over the years. There's some things that are too misshapen or small to hold on to, but something like this is just perfect. And this is so I don't have to attach a punty and leave any marks. I can just throw it straight in the kiln after this. And so I'm going to give it a slight puff as I pull. This will create a very long but thin-walled channel that I can very quickly pop a hole into and rip off with the flame. I'm going to remove a little bit of the glass to start opening up a larger hole. This is causing the walls to thin out around the hole, which then the heat will start to melt back and open the hole even larger. And then I'll start to use my jacks to open the hole a little bit larger. I've got a bit of extra glass on one of the edges, so I'm going to pull that off also. Sometimes I'll grab a thicker area and kind of swipe it over to a thinner area. That helps to even it out. And so I hope you're enjoying the show so far. If so, make sure to hit the like button and share it to your favorite social feed like Facebook. I definitely need your help to promote the channel. Getting one of my glass blowing videos on the trending page here on YouTube has always been a dream of mine. That's kind of like being on the front shelf of the video or bookstore. But it is going to take some time. I'm going to have to keep working at it. And so make sure you don't miss my future work by hitting the subscribe button. That's a good way to keep track of the projects I do here on YouTube. But for the last part of this project, I'm going to make a glass stopper for the top of the inkwell. I'm starting out with this 9mm rod. I'm going to be gathering up a large sphere. I'll put a good amount of heat into it and point it more down towards the floor. And gravity will start to pull out more of a taper shape. And so that round taper shape should fit inside the top of the vessel and give me a slightly airtight seal. Airtight seals can be difficult. It might take a bit more shaping than this. But I'll give this one a try and see how well it does over time. If the ink starts to dry out, I might have to put more time into the shaping process. Not just this top, but the inkwell as well. And so here's a close-up of the glass pens. You can see those grooves in there. But now it's time to run the test. And so this is a water-based ink. It's not very viscous. It's a little more runnier than I expected. But hey, look at that. It seems to be working. I'm going to add a little more ink to the well. And now I'll try the different glass pens I made to see if I can see a difference. So you can really see the ink has soaked into the grooves there. It's just not drawing down to the tip as I expected. I might need a thicker, more cohesive ink, or the tips themselves may need to be a little more fine-tuned. Of course, I've never written with a quill, so I don't know what to expect. But I want to thank you for watching this episode on the ink pen and joining me here on the Matt Jasa channel.